zoom in on this idea about this unfair advantage, that somehow trans women have an unfair advantage over other athletes in sport. So this idea is not supported by any science at all. It doesn't surprise me that the UCP is not interested in science. I mean, we've seen several times in wildlife that science is not important. I guess this is just another example of that. But really, this idea is based on the assumption that trans women have more testosterone. So let's explore that a little bit. More testosterone leads to bigger muscles, faster times, tends to be associated with being stronger and faster. But that is so wrong, Mr. Chair. Again, we find a government basing policies on stereotypes, assumptions, transphobia, and just utter nonsense. So here's the reality check. In Judith Butler's book, Who's Afraid of Gender, she really dives into this, and I highly recommend that all members in the House check out this book. But basically, the research shows that testosterone varies widely between and within genders. The research shows that there is considerable overlap in testosterone levels between genders. 16.5% of men have very low testosterone. 13.5% of women have higher than average testosterone. And there's a lot of overlap in those levels between genders. 0.16% of Canadians are trans women. They may or may not have high testosterone. These ideas are not correlated. Testosterone has no influence on gender, but it also, well, that's not entirely true. I guess high levels have some influence, but gender is quite fluid anyways. We think about it as being binary. It really is not. Sports performance does not correlate with predictable levels of endogenous testosterone, period. Sports performance correlates with dedication and commitment to your sport. It correlates with training, and it actually correlates a lot with money, which I'm going to get into in a moment. So consider that when a trans woman does well in sports, we instantly start talking about her hormone levels. Oh, a trans woman won a race. She must have high testosterone. But when trans women lose races, we don't talk about the hormones at all. So in its very essence, this argument around hormone levels falls away because it cannot carry into both sides of that. No other athletes defend or discuss hormone levels when they talk about winning or losing sports. Only trans athletes. And that right there should tell you just how this whole conversation is about discrimination, not about fairness. A lot of UCP MLAs in this House have spoken about protecting our girls, protecting girls in sport. And as a mother of two girls, 1000% I agree with my colleague who is talking about how we all want to protect our girls all the time, obviously. It's particularly egregious to argue that eliminating trans girls and trans women from sports is about protecting our girls. I think that that is a gross misinterpretation of the word protecting, but in context, we must also ask ourselves, what or whom are we protecting our girls from? Are we trying to protect our girls from other girls? Other trans girls athletes or trans women athletes? So I was kind of curious about what are the biggest threats to women and girls in sports. So I did a pretty simple Google search, which I'm pretty sure anybody in this House could have done. I Googled threats to girls in sports. And that took me to the Women's Sports Foundation. You might be fascinated to learn that the presence of trans athletes in sports wasn't on the list of things that are threatening women and girls in sports. But you know what was? Discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, bullying, particularly for disabled girls in sports, social isolation, negative performance evaluations, fear of being judged for being too strong or too masculine, and the biggest threat of all to women and girls in sports, sexual abuse. At the elite level, Paralympic athletes experience sexual violence 3 times than athletes who do not have some kind of physical disability. That is disgusting. It's really funny how trans athletes wasn't on the list. Why do girls leave sports? Because there aren't as good facilities or they don't get as good playing times. They have lower quality coaches because the coaches are paid less. They get less money for training, uniforms, coaches. Girls' sports are funded less. In a report from the UN called Tackling Violence Against Women and Girls in Sport from 2023, 21% of females compared with 11% of males experienced a form of sexual abuse at least once as a child in sport. Sport has some of the most shocking cases of sexism and violence against women and girls. 29.7% of females said they had been looked at in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. 31.8% of females are punished with excessive training or exercise. They're beaten with objects. They're even forced to the ground when they don't perform. Violence to girls in sports includes physical, sexual, psychological harassment, acts of coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty. And this violence and discrimination is a manifestation of historically unequal power relationships between men and women. Sports is still highly dominated by men. Women of color are really underrepresented. And so who is threatening our girls in sport? Who is conducting these egregious acts of harm on our women and girls in sports? Coaches, clinicians, senior federation staff, gym owners. These athletes may be too afraid to even report the harassment that is happening to them. The solution is not legislation that bans trans girls from sports. It's legislation that protects our girls by requiring sexual harassment training and more. Thank you.